The incessant rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor was a sound that had long ago buried itself into my subconscious. It was the metronome to my life. The smell of bleach, stale coffee, and the sharp metallic tang of iodine clung to my scrubs like a second skin. It was 7:15 p.m. on a Sunday, and I was exactly where I always was. My name is Emily Johnson. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. And please, stay with me until the end. I leaned against the stainless steel counter of the nurse's station, pressing the heels of my hands into my burning eyes. This was my 14th consecutive shift as the head nurse of the emergency room at St. Jude's Medical Center. My feet, encased in practical, orthopedically supported white clogs, felt like they were made of lead. Every joint in my 36-year-old body ached with a dull, throbbing intensity that only comes from chronic, unrelenting exhaustion. "You look like you're about to pass out in the charting tray." A deep, gentle voice broke through my fatigue. I lowered my hands and blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights. Dr. Robert Evans, the chief of emergency medicine, stood across the counter holding a lukewarm cup of cafeteria coffee. He was a man in his late 50s with salt and pepper hair and a perpetually kind expression that belied the chaos he managed every day. He looked at me with a mixture of professional concern and fatherly affection. "I'm fine, Robert," I lied, forcing a tight, unconvincing smile. I reached for a stack of patient discharge files, needing to keep my hands busy. "Just a little undercaffeinated. The Johnson stubbornness, you know?" Robert didn't smile back. He reached out and gently placed his hand over the files, stopping me. "You're not fine. You're running on fumes. 14 shifts in a row is dangerous, not just for you, but for the floor. I'm pulling you off the schedule for the next 2 days. Go home, sleep, see your family." "I can't," I said, the panic rising in my chest faster than I could suppress it. "I need the overtime. You know I do. I have obligations." "Obligations," Robert repeated, the word heavy with unspoken judgment. He knew I didn't have a mortgage on a mansion, a luxury car, or a gambling debt. He knew I lived in a modest one-bedroom apartment and drove a 10-year-old sedan. "Whatever this secret fund of yours is, it's going to kill you before you can spend it. Go home. That's an order from your chief." I swallowed hard, nodding slowly. There was no arguing with Robert when he used that tone. I stripped off my gloves, threw them in the biohazard bin, and signed out. But the truth was, the exhaustion I felt in the ER was nothing compared to the emotional drain of what awaited me outside these sterile walls. The drive to my parents' house in the suburbs was a blur of highway lights and freezing rain. I hadn't had time to go back to my apartment to shower or change, which meant I was showing up to Sunday dinner looking exactly like what I was, a workhorse. The house I grew up in was a picturesque 2-story colonial with a perfectly manicured lawn, even in the dead of winter. Warm golden light spilled from the bay windows, painting a picture of suburban perfection. But as I walked up the driveway, the familiar knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I pushed the heavy oak door open. The rich, savory aroma of my mother's pot roast hit me instantly, a stark contrast to the antiseptic smell I carried with me. "I'm here," I called out, slipping off my damp coat. From the dining room, the sound of low, comforting voices drifted out, punctuated by the high-pitched giggles of my nephew and niece, Liam and Sophie. I walked through the archway and stopped. There they were, the picture-perfect family, -1. My father, Daniel, sat at the head of the table, carving the roast with practiced precision. My mother, Sarah, was hovering over a chair, tucking a soft knitted blanket around the shoulders of the woman sitting there, Chloe, my younger sister. She was 32, but sitting there, wrapped in a blanket, sipping hot tea with a pained expression, she looked like a fragile child. Her hair was perfectly styled in effortless, loose waves, and her skin, despite her supposed agonizing pain, was flawless. "Shh, Liam, honey, keep it down," my mother hissed gently at the 7-year-old, who was tapping a spoon against his plate. "Auntie Chloe's head is splitting. You know how bad her migraines get." Chloe offered a weak, martyred smile, pressing 2 manicured fingers to her temples. "It's okay, Mom. Let them play. I'll just endure it. I don't want to ruin Sunday dinner just because my body is failing me." I cleared my throat, stepping fully into the light. "Sorry I'm late." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The warmth evaporated, replaced by a chilling, familiar tension. My mother straightened up, her eyes dropping immediately to my faded blue scrubs. Her lips thinned into a hard line. "Late again. And you couldn't even bother to change? You smell like sickness. We are trying to have a nice family meal." "I was at work, Mom. We had a multi-car pileup on the interstate. I came straight here the second my chief forced me to clock out, I said, my voice steady, though my chest tightened. Always an excuse, my father muttered, not looking up from the roast. He set the carving knife down with a deliberate, heavy clack. You always find a reason to put your job above your family. Your sister has been in agony all week, and you haven't called her once. I looked at Chloe. She didn't meet my eyes. She just stared mournfully at her tea. I don't expect her to call, Dad, Chloe said, her voice a fragile whisper. She has important things to do. Saving lives. My little problems don't matter. They do matter, my mother snapped fiercely, glaring at me. Your sister can barely get out of bed, let alone go to work. She's raising 2 kids on her own. She's struggling to breathe under the weight of her bills, and her own sister, who makes a 6-figure salary, mind you, acts like she doesn't exist. The injustice of it burned in my throat, a fiery, acidic rage that I had learned to swallow for 5 long years. They didn't know. They had no idea. When Chloe's marriage fell apart 5 years ago, she had come to me sobbing, claiming her ex-husband had left her with nothing. She told our parents she was too sick to work, plagued by mysterious chronic fatigue and migraines that no doctor could ever seem to diagnose. Our parents, living on a fixed retirement income, were devastated but unable to support her fully. So I stepped in. But Chloe, with her immense, fragile pride, had wept and said she could never accept charity from her older sister. She said it would humiliate her. To protect her ego, I had hired a lawyer and set up a blind LLC called the Local Medical Support Fund. Every month, this fund miraculously approved Chloe for a grant that paid her rent, a grant that paid Liam and Sophie's tuition, a grant that covered her groceries, her utilities, and her health insurance. Every single dollar came from me, from my back-to-back shifts, from my missed holidays, from the life I had entirely put on hold. I had sacrificed my own chance at marriage, at having a home, at ever sleeping a full 8 hours, just to keep a roof over my niece and nephew's heads without bruising my sister's delicate pride. And my reward was this table, being looked at like a monster by the parents who worshipped the daughter I was secretly keeping alive. I'm sorry, Chloe. How are you feeling? I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. It was a survival tactic. If I showed them I was bleeding, they would only twist the knife. I don't know how I'm going to pay Liam and Sophie's school tuition this month, Chloe whispered, a single perfect tear slipping down her cheek. My head hurts so much I can't even look at a screen to look for remote work. The school sent a warning. I'm just a failure as a mother. Oh, sweetheart, no, don't say that, my mother cooed, rushing to hug her. She shot me a venomous look over Chloe's shoulder. If some people in this family had a shred of empathy, you wouldn't have to worry. But don't you fret. Your father and I will figure something out. We always do. I sat down at the table, the food tasting like ash in my mouth. I endured an hour of their passive-aggressive jabs, listening to my father praise Chloe's resilience, and my mother mourn Chloe's tragic luck. And I watched Liam and Sophie, my beautiful, innocent niece and nephew, and reminded myself why I did this. I did it for them. If I didn't work myself to the bone, those kids would suffer. At 9 p.m., I couldn't take the suffocating air of the house anymore. I claimed an early morning meeting and slipped out the front door. The freezing rain had stopped, leaving the suburban streets slick and gleaming under the streetlights. I got into my cold car, my hands shaking slightly as I gripped the steering wheel. I didn't turn the key right away. Instead, I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. I looked at my checking account. My balance was a fragile thing, constantly depleted by the demands of the fund. I opened the transfer window, selected the LLC account, and typed in the amount, $5,000. It was exactly what she needed for the tuition and the month's rent. I hit confirm. The money vanished from my account, destined to appear in Chloe's inbox tomorrow morning as a blessing from the foundation. I leaned my head back against the headrest and closed my eyes, letting out a breath that sounded like a sob. I was so tired, deeply, fundamentally tired, but I had fixed it. Chloe wouldn't have to stress, the kids wouldn't be kicked out of school. I had done my job as the older sister. I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway. Instead of taking the highway straight back to my apartment, I turned towards the downtown district. My brain was buzzing with too much adrenaline and caffeine. I knew I wouldn't be able to sleep if I went home right now. I just needed to drive. I needed the mindless motion to numb the stinging words my mother had hurled at me. Downtown was alive despite the Sunday night chill. The neon signs of high-end restaurants and exclusive lounges reflected in the puddles on the asphalt. I drove slowly, the heater blasting, letting the city wash over me. I was stopped at a red light at the corner of 5th and Main, right across from the Velvet Room, an upscale members-only bar known for its exorbitant prices and strict dress code. I was staring blankly at the valet stand when a brand new, charcoal gray Range Rover pulled up to the curb. It was the kind of car that cost more than my first 3 years of nursing salary combined. The valet rushed over and opened the passenger door. A woman stepped out. She was wearing a stunning, form-fitting emerald green cocktail dress that caught the streetlights. A tailored white cashmere coat was draped elegantly over her shoulders. She stepped onto the pavement in 4-inch Christian Louboutin stilettos, her movements fluid, graceful, and entirely devoid of pain. She tilted her head back and let out a loud, ringing laugh that echoed through the crisp winter air. It was a joyful, unburdened sound. My breath caught in my throat. My hands locked onto the steering wheel with a grip so tight my knuckles turned bone white. It was Chloe, my sick, frail sister who, less than 45 minutes ago, had been wrapped in a blanket, weeping about a paralyzing migraine and impending homelessness. I couldn't blink. I couldn't breathe. I just watched an absolute paralyzing horror. The driver's door of the Range Rover opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, heavily muscled, wearing a tailored suit with no tie, his hair slicked back. This was Tyler Vance. I knew his face from the brief, vague mentions Chloe had made about a friend who occasionally helped her with groceries. Tyler walked around the front of the SUV, wrapped a possessive arm around Chloe's waist, and pulled her close. She smiled up at him, radiant and glowing with health. But it wasn't the man, or the dress, or the miraculous cure of her migraine that made my heart stop. It was what she was holding in her left hand. Dangling casually from her wrist was a limited edition Chanel handbag. The distinct quilted leather and the gleaming gold hardware mocked me under the city lights. I didn't care about fashion, but working with doctors and their wealthy wives, you learn the price of things. That bag was $5,000. Exactly $5,000. The exact amount of blood money I had just transferred to keep her children from being thrown out of school. The light turned green. The car behind me honked, a harsh, blaring sound that shattered the glass walls of the delusion I had been living in. I didn't move. I watched as Tyler handed the keys to the valet, and Chloe, my poor, destitute sister, linked her arm through his. They walked past the velvet rope and disappeared into the warm, exclusive glow of the bar. I pressed my foot down on the gas, my vision blurring, not with tears, but with a cold, blinding clarity. For 5 years, I thought I was a savior in the shadows. I thought I was the silent foundation keeping my family from collapsing. But as I drove through the dark city streets, the smell of the hospital still clinging to my skin, the truth finally set in. I wasn't a savior. I was a victim, a bank account, a fool. And as the shock began to recede, it was replaced by something else, something I hadn't felt in a very, very long time. Rage. Pure, unadulterated, calculated rage. Chloe had played her part perfectly, but she had forgotten one crucial detail. I was the one writing the checks. And the bank was officially closed. The cold didn't register. The biting Chicago wind whipped against my face as I sat in my parked car down the street from the Velvet Room, watching the entrance until the neon signs buzzed off and the valet stand closed. I didn't cry. I think that was the most terrifying part of that night. When you experience a betrayal of that magnitude, you expect the cinematic reaction. The sobbing over the steering wheel, the screaming, the shattered glass. But I had spent 5 years in an emergency room. I was trained to handle trauma. And when a patient is bleeding out, you don't scream. You compress the wound, you assess the damage, and you prepare for surgery. My family was the trauma, and I was finally ready to operate. The next morning, I didn't go to the hospital. True to his word, Dr. Evans had locked me out of the scheduling system for 48 hours. For the first time in half a decade, I woke up in my own bed with nowhere to be. The silence of my small apartment was deafening. I made a pot of black coffee, sat at my tiny kitchen table, and opened my laptop. I needed a scalpel. I needed Jessica. Jessica Hayes was a force of nature. We had met a decade ago when she brought her mother into the ER with a fractured hip. I had navigated the labyrinth of hospital bureaucracy to get her mother a private room, and in return, Jessica, a ruthless and brilliant family law attorney, had sworn a life debt to me. She was the one who had helped me set up the Blind LLC, the local medical support fund, that I had used to funnel my life savings to Chloe. At 10 a.m., I walked into her sleek, glass-paneled office downtown. She looked up from a stack of briefs, her sharp blue eyes scanning my face. She didn't offer a polite greeting. She just pointed to the leather chair across from her desk. You look like a ghost holding a grudge, Jessica said, closing her laptop. What happened? Did the LLC get audited? No, I said, my voice eerily calm. I sat down and placed my hands flat on her desk. I saw her, Jess. I saw Chloe last night, outside the velvet room, in a $5,000 dress holding a Chanel bag draped over a man who looked like he stepped out of a GQ magazine. Jessica froze. For a woman who made a living out of messy divorces and hidden assets, she was rarely caught off guard. The velvet room? Emily. She claims she can't even walk to her mailbox without a migraine. It's a lie, I said, the words tasting like ash and iron. The illness, the poverty, the impending homelessness, all of it. It's a beautifully orchestrated 5-year lie, and I've been funding it. Jessica leaned back, interlacing her fingers. Her lawyer instincts instantly took over the shock. Who was the man? I don't know his last name. I've heard her mention a friend named Tyler, someone who occasionally helps her carry groceries. But the way they were acting, he's not carrying her groceries, Jess. Okay, Jessica breathed out, pulling a legal pad toward her. The predatory gleam in her eyes, the one that made opposing counsel sweat, was now fully directed at my sister. What do you want to do? We can shut the LLC down today, cut off the funding. Let the eviction notices roll in. No, I said instantly. The word was sharp, definitive. Jessica raised an eyebrow. You're not thinking of forgiving this. I'm not forgiving anything, I interrupted, leaning forward. If I cut the funding today, she will go crying to my parents. She will spin a story about how the charity suddenly dried up, and my parents will drain whatever miserable savings they have left to save her. Or worse, she'll paint herself as the victim, and I'll just be the cold-hearted sister who abandoned her. I don't just want to stop the bleeding, Jess. I want to amputate the rot. I need to know exactly where every single dime of my money went. I need to know who this Tyler is. And most importantly, I need to know what is happening to Liam and Sophie. The mention of the kids shifted the energy in the room. Jessica's expression hardened. You think the kids are in danger? I think a woman who lies about chronic illness to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars from her sister to buy designer bags isn't spending her weekends baking cookies and doing flashcards, I said, my voice trembling for the first time. I need proof, concrete, undeniable proof of everything. Can you get a private investigator on this? Jessica didn't hesitate. She picked up her phone. I have the best one in Chicago, ex-forensic accountant, ex-cop. If she bought a pack of gum 3 years ago, he'll find the receipt. But, Emily, this is going to cost you, and it's going to be ugly. Are you prepared for what he might find? I've spent 5 years living in a nightmare, I replied. I'm ready to wake up. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in psychological torture. My 48 hours of mandatory leave ended, and I returned to the ER. The chaos of trauma bays, the codes, the blood, it was ironically comforting. It was straightforward. A gunshot wound makes sense. A severed artery has a clear solution. It was the text waiting on my phone in the break room that felt like poison. Chloe. Liam's school called again. They said the tuition check from the grant hasn't cleared yet. I'm so stressed my vision is blurring. Mom had to come over and make dinner. Pray for me. Mom, your sister is in a terrible state. The foundation is delaying her grant. If you had a shred of decency, you would offer to loan her a few $100s. But I know better than to ask you for compassion. Every text was a needle under my fingernails. But I played the part. I replied to Chloe with generic sympathies. I ignored my mother's passive-aggressive venom. I kept the LLC running, authorizing the monthly transfers, watching my hard-earned money vanish into Chloe's account. It felt like feeding a parasite, but Jessica had insisted we not change the pattern until the investigator had finished casting the net. On the 15th day, Jessica called me. "Get to my office," was all she said. I traded my shift with another charge nurse and drove downtown. When I walked into Jessica's office, the blinds were drawn. A thick manila folder sat in the center of her glass desk like an unexploded bomb. Sitting next to Jessica was a stoic man in a faded corduroy jacket, Marcus, the private investigator. Wait, no, he introduced himself as David. David, the investigator. "Sit down," Jessica said, her voice unusually subdued. I took a seat, my heart hammering against my ribs. "How bad is it?" David pushed the folder toward me. "Ms. Johnson, in my 20 years of doing this, I have investigated embezzlers, cheating spouses, and con artists. Your sister is a special breed of all three." I opened the folder. The first page was a glossy, high-definition photograph. It was Chloe and Tyler. They were on a pristine white sand beach holding tropical cocktails laughing. Cabo San Lucas, David stated. 3 months ago, while she was telling your family she was bedridden with a severe neurological flare-up, she was staying in a $1,200 a night villa, paid for by a debit card linked to the account where your LLC deposits her grants. I turned the page. Spreadsheets, itemized credit card statements. Let's talk about Tyler Vance, David continued, tapping the spreadsheet. 34 years old. No documented employment for the last 6 years. He has a history of latching onto vulnerable, wealthy women. Only in this case, the wealthy woman is actually you. For the last 4 years, your sister has been entirely funding his lifestyle. The Range Rover you saw, leased in her name. The luxury apartment he lives in downtown, she pays the rent. Rolex watches, custom suits, high-end dinners. She has spent roughly $150,000 of your money directly on him. My stomach violently rebelled. $150,000. I thought of the nights I had slept in a sterile supply closet for 2 hours just to pick up a double shift. I thought of the groceries I had put back on the shelf because I needed to make sure Chloe's medical bills were covered. And the kids? I choked out, dreading the answer. Liam and Sophie. She told me she needed the money for their private school, for their tutors. Jessica sighed, rubbing her temples. Emily, the kids aren't in private school. I stopped breathing. What? David pulled out another document. She pulled them out of St. Mary's Academy 3 years ago. They are enrolled in the local underfunded public school in her district, but she kept generating fake tuition invoices, I suspect using a basic PDF editor to submit to your foundation to keep the money flowing. Who is watching them when she's in Cabo? I demanded, my voice rising in panic. Who is feeding them when she's at the Velvet Room? She utilizes a string of cheap, unvetted teenage babysitters, David said, his tone grim. We pulled the grocery delivery receipts. While she is dining on Wagyu beef downtown, she is having bulk ramen, frozen chicken nuggets, and canned soup delivered to the house for the kids. Liam was wearing sneakers with holes in them at recess last week. The school counselor actually filed a wellness report regarding their unkempt appearance, but Chloe managed to manipulate the social worker by crying about her chronic illness and playing the victim. Tears, hot and furious, finally spilled over my eyelashes. They weren't for me. They were for Liam and Sophie. They were for the innocent 5- and 7-year-old who were living in functional poverty while their mother played a wealthy socialite on my dime. I'm going to kill her, I whispered, the words slipping out with terrifying sincerity. I'm going to rip her apart. Take a breath, Emily, Jessica said sharply, leaning over the desk, because that's not even the worst of it. David, show her the house. David flipped to the very back of the folder. He pulled out a dense legal document covered in municipal stamps. During the financial background check, I ran a deep dive into all assets associated with your immediate family, David explained. I know you didn't ask me to look into your parents, but when a con artist is operating within a family, they rarely limit themselves to one victim. He slid the document toward me. This is a public property record for your parents' home, the Colonial. I frowned, wiping my eyes. They own it outright. Dad paid off the mortgage 5 years ago when he retired. He did, David confirmed. But 8 months ago, a secondary lien was placed on the property, a second mortgage. The room seemed to tilt. A second mortgage? For how much? $50,000, Jessica answered, her voice soft. Dad took out a $50,000 loan against his and Mom's house? Why? David pointed to a highlighted line of bank routing numbers on the next page. Because 8 months ago, your sister convinced him she had a brilliant business opportunity to start a boutique wellness brand, but she needed seed money and her credit was ruined from her divorce. Your father bypassed your mother. She is not a signatory on this loan, which is legally questionable, but he managed it through a predatory online lender. He wired the entire $50,000 to an account controlled by Chloe. And the business? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Never existed, David said. She blew through the $50,000 in 4 months, mostly on Tyler's gambling debts and a trip to Paris. I stared at the paperwork, my mind struggling to process the sheer magnitude of the destruction. My parents, who treated me like dirt because I was supposedly abandoning the family, were unknowingly standing on a trapdoor. Here is the kicker, Jessica said, her lawyer mode fully engaged. The monthly payments on that high-interest second mortgage are exorbitant. Your father is living on a fixed pension. He has missed the last 2 payments. Emily, the lender has already issued a pre-foreclosure warning. If he misses 1 more payment, the bank is going to take their house." Silence descended on the office. A heavy, suffocating silence. I closed my eyes and the image of Sunday dinner flashed in my mind. My father carving the roast, lecturing me on family loyalty. My mother wrapping a blanket around Chloe, calling me heartless. "If some people in this family had a shred of empathy," my mother had said, "they were protecting the very serpent that was currently unhinging its jaw to swallow them whole." "Do we tell them?" Jessica asked gently. "Do we call your parents and show them this?" I opened my eyes. The tears were gone. The shock had burned away, leaving behind a cold, impenetrable armor. "No," I said. Jessica looked surprised. "Emily, they are going to lose their home." "If I tell my father right now that Chloe stole his money, he will find a way to justify it. He'll say she made a mistake. He'll try to protect her from the fallout," I said, my voice eerily steady. "If I tell my mother, she will blame me for not giving Chloe the $50,000 myself so Dad wouldn't have had to. They are addicted to saving her, and they are addicted to hating me for not being their perfect martyr." I stood up, closing the manila folder and pulling it toward my chest like a shield. "They don't get to learn the truth in private. They don't get to sweep this under the rug to protect the family image," I said, looking at Jessica. "I want to build a cage so tight, so legally sound, that when the truth comes out, none of them can escape it." Jessica smiled, a slow, dangerous curve of her lips. "I like the sound of that. What's the play, Em?" "The play is the children," I said, my heart aching for Liam and Sophie. "If I expose Chloe now, she'll take those kids and run to Tyler, or she'll use them as hostages to force my parents to bail her out. I need to secure the kids first. Then I am going to let my father default on that house. I am going to let the bank initiate the foreclosure." "That is ruthless, Emily," David noted, raising his eyebrows in mild impressiveness. "I've spent 5 years keeping everyone warm by setting myself on fire," I replied. "It's time they learned what the cold feels like. Jess, what do we need to do to get emergency custody of Liam and Sophie?" Jessica leaned over her desk, grabbing a fresh legal pad. "It's not easy to strip a biological mother of her rights, even a terrible one. We need documented neglect. The school counselor's report is a start, but we need a catalyst. A major incident that proves she is fundamentally unfit, something undeniable in front of a family court judge." "So we wait?" I asked, frustration leaking into my voice. "We wait and we watch," Jessica said. "David will monitor her movements 24/7. The second she slips up, the second she leaves those kids in a compromised situation, we strike. Until then, you have to go back to being the tired, oblivious sister." I nodded, gripping the folder. I could do that. I had been acting for 5 years. A few more weeks wouldn't kill me. But as I walked out of Jessica's office and back out into the freezing Chicago air, I didn't feel like a victim anymore. I felt like a ticking time bomb. The countdown had started. I just needed Chloe to make one fatal mistake. And knowing my sister's arrogance, I wouldn't have to wait long. The waiting was a distinct kind of psychological torture. For 3 weeks after sitting in Jessica's office, I lived a double life. By day, I was the exhausted, dedicated head nurse of the ER. By night, I was an actress playing the role of the oblivious, compliant sister. I continued to approve the LLC transfers. I continued to endure my mother's passive-aggressive texts about how I needed to step up for my family. I continued to sit at Sunday dinners, watching Chloe massage her temples and moan about her mysterious chronic pain, knowing that David, the private investigator, had logged her drinking margaritas on a yacht on Lake Michigan just 48 hours prior. Every time I looked at her, I saw the Chanel bag. I saw Tyler Vance's custom suits. I saw my father's second mortgage and the impending ruin of my parents' lives. But I kept my mouth shut. Jessica had been clear. We need a catalyst. We need an undeniable incident of neglect to secure the kids. I didn't know that the catalyst would almost cost my nephew his life. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 2:15 p.m. Outside, a miserable, freezing rain was washing the Chicago streets gray. Inside the ER, it was a standard, chaotic shift. I was at the central station, updating a triage board, when the red EMS radio crackled to life. The sharp, static-filled voice of a paramedic cut through the ambient noise of the hospital. "St. Jude's, this is Medic 44, coming in hot. ETA 3 minutes. We have a 7-year-old male, severe anaphylactic shock. Accidental peanut ingestion at school. Patient was given an EpiPen by the school nurse, but he rebounded. He is currently cyanotic, airway is severely compromised, BP is tanking at 60/40. We attempted field intubation, but couldn't secure the airway due to massive laryngeal swelling. We are bagging him, but SATs are dropping, currently at 82%. My blood ran cold. 7 years old. Peanut allergy. Liam. I knew Liam had a severe peanut allergy. I had been the one to pay for his allergist appointments 3 years ago when Chloe claimed her insurance wouldn't cover the specialist. Trauma Bay 1, I barked, my voice echoing across the station. Page Dr. Evans. Page pediatric anesthesia. Stat. I need a crash cart, an IO drill, and a surgical airway kit open and ready on the tray. Now! My team moved like a well-oiled machine, but my hands were shaking as I pulled on a fresh pair of purple nitrile gloves. I told myself it was just a coincidence. There were hundreds of 7-year-old boys with peanut allergies in the city. It wasn't Liam. It couldn't be Liam. The double doors of the ambulance bay burst open. The paramedics sprinted down the hallway, the gurney rattling violently. One paramedic was straddling the boy, desperately squeezing a bag valve mask over his face, while the other pushed the stretcher. As they turned into Trauma Bay 1, the harsh overhead lights illuminated the child's face. My heart stopped. It was him. My beautiful, sweet nephew. His small face was swollen beyond recognition, his lips and nail beds a terrifying, bruised blue. His chest was barely rising. He looked so tiny, so incredibly fragile on the adult-sized gurney. Emily! Dr. Evans rushed into the room, snapping on his gloves. He took one look at the boy, then looked at me. He knew. Emily, step out. You can't be in here. This is your nephew. No, I said. The word tore out of my throat, feral and absolute. I am the head nurse. His veins are collapsed. You won't get a peripheral line, and you need access now. I'm doing the IO. Robert looked into my eyes, saw the terrifying clinical detachment I was forcing into my brain, and gave a curt nod. Do it. Respiratory, get out of my way. I need a direct look at those cords. If I can't tube him in the next 30 seconds, we are cutting a surgical airway. Do you I grabbed the intraosseous drill, a medical device that literally drills a needle directly into the bone marrow to deliver life-saving medications when veins are inaccessible. I found the landmark on Liam's small, pale shin just below his knee. I didn't let myself think about how many times I had tied his shoelaces on this exact leg. I didn't think about his laugh, I just saw the anatomy. I pressed the trigger. The sickening whir and crunch of the needle entering the bone filled the room. I have access, I stated, my voice devoid of any human emotion. Pushing 1 milligram of epinephrine, flushing with saline. I can't see the cords, the swelling is massive, Robert grunted, his face hovering inches from Liam's mouth, holding the laryngoscope. SATs are dropping to 76. Come on, buddy, open up for me. The monitor screamed, a high-pitched, rapid alarm indicating his heart rate was plummeting due to lack of oxygen. Epi is in. Pushing 100 of Solumedrol, I called out, my hands moving automatically, drawing up the steroids and slamming them into the bone line. Got it, Robert yelled, expertly sliding the endotracheal tube past the swollen tissues and into Liam's trachea. Tube is secure. Bag him. A respiratory therapist attached the bag and squeezed. We all stared at the monitor. 10 seconds. 20 seconds. Slowly, agonizingly, the oxygen saturation numbers began to climb. 80, 85, 92, 96. The blue tint began to recede from Liam's lips. His heart rate stabilized. The chaotic, terrifying energy in the room slowly deflated, replaced by the heavy, exhausted breathing of the trauma team. Good job, everyone, Robert said quietly, stepping back and wiping a line of sweat from his forehead. He looked at me, his eyes full of deep sympathy. He's stable. We're going to move him up to the pediatric intensive care unit. He's going to be okay, Emily. You saved him. I stepped back from the gurney, stripping off my gloves. My knees buckled slightly, but I caught myself on the edge of the counter. I had just drilled into my own nephew's bone to bring him back from the edge of death. Where is his mother? The admitting social worker asked, walking into the bay with a tablet. The school said they tried to call her emergency contact number 4 times, but it went straight to voicemail. That's why they called EMS directly. My mind snapped back to reality. Where is Chloe? I pulled my cell phone from my scrub pocket and walked out into the hallway. I had 4 missed calls from Liam's school, completely drowned out by the chaos of the ER. But I also had a text from David, the private investigator. It had come in an hour ago. David, Target is currently at the Enchantment Resort in Sedona, Arizona with Tyler Vance, checking into a 3-day digital detox couples retreat. Phones are surrendered at the front desk. She is entirely unreachable. A cold, dark void opened up in the center of my chest. While Liam was suffocating on the floor of his elementary school cafeteria while I was drilling into his shin to restart his heart. His mother was wrapped in a plush robe in Arizona, surrendering her phone for a luxury massage paid for by my sweat and blood. I didn't scream. I just dialed my parents' number. My father answered on the second ring. Emily, you know we're eating lunch. Why are you calling? Get to St. Jude's, I said, my voice dead. Liam is in the pediatric ICU. He had a severe anaphylactic reaction at school. He was intubated. He is stable, but critical. Come now. I hung up before he could respond. 20 minutes later, the elevator doors down the hall from the PICU burst open. My mother came sprinting down the corridor, her face pale, tears streaming down her cheeks. My father was right behind her, looking older and more fragile than I had ever seen him. Where is he? Where is my baby? My mother wailed, grabbing my arms as I stood outside Liam's glass-walled room. He's sedated. He's on a ventilator to let the swelling in his airway go down, but the doctors expect a full recovery, I explained calmly, keeping my physical distance. My father looked through the glass, his hands pressing against the pane. My God, how did this happen? Where is Chloe? Did you call Chloe? The school tried, I said, watching their faces closely. She didn't answer. I tried. It goes straight to voicemail. Does anyone know where she is today? My mother instantly bristled, her defensive instincts for her golden child kicking in even in the midst of a tragedy. She is at home, in bed, Emily. She told us this morning her migraines were blinding today. She probably took her medication and passed out. You know how the medication knocks her out. Oh, my poor Chloe. She is going to be utterly devastated when she wakes up and realizes she wasn't here for her son. And the delusion was so deeply entrenched it was almost a psychiatric condition. She's not at home, Mom, I said flatly, but we can discuss that later. Right now, the hospital administration needs a legal guardian to sign the consent forms for his PICU admission and the steroid treatments. Since Chloe is unreachable, as his grandparents, you can sign emergency proxy, but they need her medical history on file to cross-reference any genetic contraindications. Of course, whatever they need, my father stammered, wiping his eyes. I'll go down to billing and records to pull Chloe's file, I said. You stay here with him. I walked away from them, the adrenaline from the code fading, leaving behind a sharp, icy focus. I walked down to the administrative wing of the hospital. Because I was the head nurse, I had high-level administrative access to the hospital's electronic medical record, EMR, system. Epic. Chloe had always claimed she received her treatments for her chronic illnesses through a network of specialists affiliated with St. Jude's, which was why she needed so much money for out-of-network copays. I sat down at an empty terminal, swiped my badge, and typed in Chloe Johnson's name and date of birth. Her file popped up. But it wasn't just a basic patient file. It was a massive, sprawling digital dossier. I clicked on the tab labeled Disability and Insurance Claims. There were dozens of scanned PDFs, letters to the State Disability Board, medical forbearance letters sent to my father's mortgage lender explaining that Chloe's severe neurological impairment prevented her from working, thus justifying a delay in loan payments. Letters to the private school claiming she needed financial aid due to medical bankruptcy. I opened the most recent document, a detailed 5-page medical evaluation submitted to the state just 3 months ago to renew her monthly welfare checks. The document detailed her supposed chronic fatigue syndrome, her debilitating migraines, and her inability to stand for more than 20 minutes. It was a masterpiece of medical fiction. I scrolled to the bottom of the 5th page to see which corrupt pill mill doctor she was paying off to sign these fraudulent forms. My eyes locked onto the signature line. The blood roared in my ears so loudly I thought my eardrums would burst. The fluorescent lights above me seemed to flicker and dim. The signature at the bottom of the official state disability form wasn't from a corrupt doctor. It was signed Emily Johnson, RN, BSN. Right below the signature was my official National Provider Identifier, NPI, number and my state nursing license number. I sat frozen, staring at the screen as the horrifying reality of what I was looking at washed over me. Twist 3. Chloe hadn't just stolen my money. She hadn't just neglected her children. She had stolen my medical identity. For the last 3 years, she had been using my name, my credentials, and my hard-earned nursing license to forge official medical records. She was committing state and federal disability fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft. And she had tied the noose directly around my neck. If the state board audited these claims, if an insurance investigator looked too closely, they wouldn't see Chloe the con artist. They would see Emily Johnson, the head nurse at St. Jude's, illegally diagnosing and falsifying government documents for her own sister to commit financial fraud. It was a felony. It was the kind of crime that didn't just strip you of your medical license. It sent you to federal prison for a decade. Chloe knew exactly what she was doing. She knew that even if I ever found out about the money, I would never go to the police because reporting her would mean exposing the forged documents, triggering an investigation that could destroy my own life. She had built a failsafe. She had weaponized my life's work and put a loaded gun to my head. I slowly reached up and touched the computer screen, tracing the forged signature. My sister had handed me a death sentence. I didn't feel rage anymore. Rage is hot, messy, and uncontrollable. What I felt in that small, sterile administrative office was something entirely different. It was the cold, calculating, absolute certainty of an executioner. Chloe had crossed a line that fundamentally altered the universe. She was no longer my sister. She was a threat to my freedom, my career, and my survival. I pulled out my phone and called Jessica. Jessica answered. How's Liam? He's alive, in the PICU. Chloe is in Sedona on a digital detox, I said, my voice dead calm. Jesus Christ, Jessica swore softly. Okay, that's the neglect charge right there. We have the hospital records, we have David's location data. We can file for emergency custody the second she steps off that plane. We're doing more than that, Jess, I said, my eyes never leaving the forged signature on the screen. I just found her disability files in the hospital database. She's been forging my signature and using my nursing license number to commit federal fraud. She framed me. Silence on the other end of the line. Then the sound of a chair scraping back. Emily, do not touch anything. Do not delete those files. If you alter the EMR, it leaves a digital footprint and makes you look guilty. Print them out, every single page. I am calling a colleague at the DA's office right now. We need to get ahead of this and grant you whistleblower immunity before the state board catches wind of the fraud. Do whatever you have to do, I said, hitting the print command. The massive office printer whirred to life, spitting out page after page of Chloe's damnation. But I want to be the one to end her. I want to look her in the eye when I take everything away. You will, Jessica promised, her voice dark and sharp. Get the custody papers rolling. We are going to build a slaughterhouse, Emily, and your sister is going to walk right into it. I gathered the warm, printed pages from the tray, placed them carefully into a thick manila envelope, and walked out of the office. The game was over. The surgery was about to begin, and I was going to cut deep. Chloe burst into the pediatric ICU 3 days later, her performance so Oscar-worthy it almost made me sick. She wore an oversized, chunky knit sweater that made her look fragile and tiny. Her hair was perfectly disheveled in a frantic mother sort of way, and tears streamed down her perfectly moisturized cheeks. My parents flanked her like bodyguards as she threw herself at the foot of Liam's hospital bed. Liam was awake now, extubated but still pale, watching his mother's theatrics with wide, confused eyes. "Oh, my baby, my sweet, sweet boy," Chloe sobbed, gripping the bed rails as if she might collapse. "Mommy is here. Mommy is so sorry. The service in the mountains was completely dead, and then my migraine struck so violently I was vomiting for 2 days straight. I didn't know. My mother, Sarah, rubbed Chloe's back soothingly. "It's okay, sweetheart. It's not your fault. It was an accident at school. Liam is safe now." I stood in the corner of the room, my arms crossed over my chest, watching the scene unfold with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a lab rat. 3 days ago, watching this would have broken my heart. I would have felt guilty for judging her, but the woman crying by the bed wasn't a sick mother. She was a felon who had just spent 3 days getting hot stone massages in Sedona with her gigolo boyfriend while using my nursing license to forge federal documents. Chloe looked up, spotting me in the corner. For a fraction of a second, I saw a flicker of genuine apprehension in her eyes. She was waiting for the attack. She was waiting for me to ask where she had really been or to scold her for being unreachable. I didn't. I gave her a soft, exhausted smile. "I'm just glad you're here now, Chloe," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly calibrated. "He's been asking for you." The relief that washed over her face was palpable. She bought it completely. To her, I was still the overworked, emotionally stunted older sister who was too busy saving lives to notice the details of her scam. I was still the reliable ATM. "Thank you, Em," she sniffled, reaching out to squeeze my hand. "Mom told me you were the one who put the IV in his leg. You saved him. I owe you my life." "You don't owe me anything," I replied softly. "Not yet," I added in the silence of my own mind. That interaction set the tone for the next 2 months. November bled into December, and the Chicago wind turned vicious, freezing the lake and covering the city in a blanket of gray slush. Inside my life, however, everything was burning with a quiet, methodical intensity. I stopped crying. I stopped feeling tired. The chronic exhaustion that had plagued me for 5 years evaporated, replaced by a crystalline, hyper-focused energy. I was no longer a victim trapped in a cycle of obligation. I was an architect drafting the blueprints for a demolition. Every Tuesday and Thursday, on my days off, I didn't sleep. I went to Jessica's law office. Her conference room had been transformed into a war room. The massive oak table was entirely covered in paper. On the left side of the table were my records. 1,500 printed timesheets from the hospital. Every night shift, every weekend double, every holiday I had worked while the rest of the world celebrated. Next to them were 5 years of bank statements, highlighting the steady hemorrhage of my life savings into the local medical support fund. $350,000. On the right side of the table was David's investigative haul, photos of Tyler Vance driving the leased Range Rover, receipts from Michelin-starred restaurants, the fake private school invoices Chloe had submitted to my LLC, the grocery delivery receipts showing Liam and Sophie surviving on frozen nuggets while their mother drank imported champagne. And in the center of the table, isolated in a clear plastic sleeve, was the killing blow, the state disability forms bearing my forged signature and stolen national provider identifier number. "The district attorney's office has officially signed off on your whistleblower immunity," Jessica announced one afternoon, walking into the conference room with 2 cups of black coffee. She handed me one. "Because you came forward proactively with the forged documents, and because we can prove via hospital security logs and your timesheets that you were working in the ER when these evaluations were allegedly conducted in a private clinic, you are completely cleared. Your nursing license is untouchable." I let out a slow, steady breath. The invisible noose around my neck dissolved. "And Chloe?" "When we hand this file over to the fraud division, she is looking at multiple counts of identity theft, wire fraud, and defrauding a state agency," Jessica said, taking a sip of her coffee. "It's federal time, Emily, not probation. Prison." I stared at the forged signature. I didn't feel a shred of pity. "Good." "But," Jessica sighed, sitting down across from me, her expression turning serious, "we have a massive collateral damage problem. The children." I looked up. The thought of Liam and Sophie was the only thing that still had the power to make my chest ache. "If we drop the bomb, if we cut the funding and expose the fraud, Chloe is going to panic," Jessica explained, tapping a pen against the table. "Con artists are like cornered animals. She will take Liam and Sophie and run to Tyler's apartment. She will use them as human shields to extort your parents into paying her legal fees. Your parents, bless their delusional hearts, will likely fight you for custody just to hand the kids right back to her. If you just blow up her life, the kids are the ones who will end up in the crossfire. They could end up in the foster system while she awaits trial." I closed my eyes. Jessica was right. You don't detonate a bomb in a building until you've evacuated the innocents. "I won't let that happen," I said fiercely. "I will not let those kids spend one night in a state facility, and I will not let her use them to drain the last $50,000 of equity my parents have in their home." "What is the legal maneuver, Jess? There has to be a way to disarm her completely before the explosion." Jessica smiled, a slow, predatory grin that reached her sharp blue eyes. "There is," she said softly. "It's called an ex parte emergency conservatorship combined with an irrevocable trust." She pulled a thick stack of blank legal documents from her briefcase and spread them out over the forged disability papers. "This is twist number 4, Emily," Jessica said, her voice dropping into her professional, lethal cadence. "We don't just take the money away, we take her power." She pointed to the investigator's photos. "We take David's undeniable proof of her gross negligence, leaving a child with a severe allergy in the care of an unvetted teenager while she flew to Sedona, lying about their education, misappropriating funds meant for their survival. We take the evidence of her impending felony indictment for identity theft. and we go to a family court judge in a closed-door emergency session. I leaned forward, my heart hammering with a sudden, fierce hope. Will a judge grant it without her being present to defend herself? With this mountain of evidence proving imminent psychological and physical danger? Yes, Jessica confirmed. The judge will strip her of her physical and legal custody rights instantly. But we go a step further. You aren't just filing for emergency custody of the children. Jessica tapped the second stack of papers. You are filing for guardianship of their estate. Over the past 5 years, you have been funneling money into the local Medical Support Fund, LLC. But legally, as the sole proprietor of that LLC, you have the power to restructure its assets. We are going to dissolve the LLC and roll every remaining cent, plus a significant portion of your own savings, into a legally binding, irrevocable trust fund established solely for Liam and Sophie. I was starting to see the architecture of the trap. And who is the executor of this trust? You are, Jessica said. You will have absolute, legally enforced control over their housing, their education, and their health care. By the time Chloe sits down for Christmas dinner, she will be legally stripped of her children and completely locked out of the financial safety net she thought she had. She won't be able to touch a dime to pay her defense lawyers, and she won't be able to take the kids and run, because doing so would instantly trigger an Amber Alert and a kidnapping charge. It was brilliant. It was ruthless. It was a flawless, unbreakable cage. Do it, I commanded, my voice resolute. File the papers under seal. I want the judge's signature by the 23rd of December. Consider it done, Jessica said, gathering the papers. Now, we just need the stage. The stage presented itself 2 days later in the form of a group text from my mother, Sarah Johnson. We are hosting Christmas Eve dinner this year, 7 p.m. Aunt Carol, Uncle Mark, and the cousins will be here. Chloe is trying her best to help me cook despite her chronic fatigue. Emily, I expect you to be there. No excuses about the hospital this year. It's time you acted like part of this family. I read the text while standing in the ER break room. I didn't feel the usual sting of her guilt trip. I felt a cold rush of anticipation. Emily, I'll be there, Mom. I requested the night off. I'm bringing a surprise. The week before Christmas, the city of Chicago was blanketed in a heavy, picturesque snowfall. The hospitals were packed with flu cases and slip and fall injuries, but my mind was entirely clear. On December 22nd, Jessica called me. The judge signed the order, she said, her voice vibrating with triumph. Emergency custody is granted. The trust is fully established and funded. Liam and Sophie are legally under your protection as of 9 a.m. this morning. The court orders have been sealed until you serve her. Thank you, Jess, for everything, I said, a massive weight lifting from my chest. The innocents were out of the building. Are you ready for tomorrow night? She asked. I've been ready for 5 years. On my way home from the hospital that evening, I stopped at a medical supply store. The bells on the door jingled a cheerful holiday tune as I walked in. I bypassed the scrubs and the stethoscopes and walked straight to the administrative aisle. I bought a clipboard, not the cheap plastic ones. I bought a heavy, industrial-grade aluminum medical clipboard, the kind that charge nurses use to hold critical life-or-death patient charts. It was cold to the touch, rigid and unapologetic. When I got back to my apartment, I sat at my small kitchen table. I opened my tote bag and pulled out the thick stack of papers Jessica had prepared for me. I didn't need the 1,500 timesheets. That was too messy, too dramatic. I needed precision. I opened the heavy metal clasp of the clipboard and began to load the ammunition. First, the final bank statement from the dissolved LLC showing the exact total I had paid her over 5 years, $350,000. Second, the glossy, high-resolution photograph of Chloe and Tyler Vance drinking cocktails on the beach in Cabo, dated on the exact day Liam was admitted to the PICU. Third, a copy of the second mortgage document my father had secretly signed, with the $50,000 wire transfer receipt to Chloe's account attached. Fourth, the disability form bearing my forged nursing license number and signature. And finally, on the very top of the stack, the judge's freshly stamped order granting me full legal and physical custody of Liam and Sophie Johnson. I snapped the heavy metal clasp shut. The sound was a loud, definitive clack, echoing in the quiet apartment. I ran my hand over the cold aluminum surface. It felt like a verdict. My mother wanted me to act like a part of the family. My father wanted me to show empathy. Chloe wanted me to keep playing the oblivious ATM. Tomorrow night, surrounded by our entire extended family, the Christmas lights shining brightly and the roast cooking in the oven, I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. I was going to give them the truth. and it was going to burn their perfect delusional world right to the ground. The snow began to fall just as the sun set on Christmas Eve, covering the suburban streets of Chicago in a pristine, blindingly white blanket. It was the kind of idyllic, picture-perfect snowfall you see in holiday movies, designed to make everything look pure and clean. But I knew better. I knew that beneath that fresh layer of white, the dirt, the ice, and the rot were still there, just waiting for the spring thaw to be exposed. I wasn't going to wait for spring. I sat in my idling car at the end of my parents' street for a full 10 minutes before pulling into the driveway. The heater was blasting, but I didn't feel the warmth. I felt completely numb, insulated by a cold, crystalline layer of absolute resolve. On the passenger seat next to me sat my black canvas tote bag. Inside it was the heavy, industrial-grade aluminum medical clipboard. It weighed less than 2 pounds, but it held the power to obliterate half a decade of lies. I took a deep breath, the cold air stinging my lungs, turned off the engine, and grabbed the bag. The walk up the driveway felt like a march to the executioner's block, except I wasn't the one carrying the hood. The moment I opened the heavy oak front door, the overwhelming sensory overload of the Johnson family Christmas hit me. The smell of roasting turkey, cinnamon, and spiced cider was thick in the air. The house was decorated to the point of absurdity. Garlands wrapped tightly around the banisters, thousands of twinkling lights, and a massive 12-foot Douglas fir taking up half the living room. The house was packed. Aunt Carol and Uncle Mark had flown in from Ohio. My cousins, David and Rachel, were sitting by the fireplace with their spouses. The low murmur of festive chatter and the sound of Bing Crosby crooning from the stereo speakers created a wall of suffocating cheerfulness. "Emily, you actually made it!" Aunt Carol was the first to spot me. She rushed over, wrapping me in a suffocating hug that smelled heavily of expensive perfume and gin. "Your mother told us you were trying to get the night off. We're so glad you're not locked in that dreadful hospital for once." "Hi, Aunt Carol. Merry Christmas," I said smoothly, stepping out of the embrace. "Look at you, still wearing those practical shoes," she chuckled, pointing at my boots. "You should take a page out of Chloe's book. Have you seen her tonight? She looks like an angel." I looked past Aunt Carol into the living room. Chloe was holding court on the center sofa. She was wearing a flowing ivory cashmere dress that draped elegantly over her frame. It was understated, but anyone who knew fabrics knew it was a $2,000 garment. Around her neck hung a delicate, sparkling diamond pendant. She was sipping sparkling cider, laughing weakly at a joke Uncle Mark had just told, her hand resting delicately against her forehead in her signature pose of brave suffering. At her feet, sitting on the rug, were Liam and Sophie. They were playing quietly with a set of wooden blocks. Liam looked pale, his small body still recovering from the brutal steroid regimen of the PICU just weeks prior. Sophie's hair was a little unkempt, the hem of her holiday dress slightly frayed. The contrast between the radiant, wealthy-looking mother and the subdued, neglected-looking children made my jaw clench so hard my teeth ached. "Auntie Em!" Liam spotted me. He scrambled up from the floor and ran to me, wrapping his thin arms around my waist. Sophie was right behind him, burying her face in my coat. I dropped to my knees, holding them tightly. "Hey, my sweet bugs. How are you feeling, Liam? Is your throat okay?" "It's better," Liam whispered, his voice still a little raspy. "Mommy said I ruined her mountain trip because I ate the bad peanut." A surge of white-hot fury flared in my chest, but I pushed it down, kissing the top of his head. "You didn't ruin anything, buddy. You are the most important thing in the world. Don't ever forget that." "Emily, don't crowd them. They just got over their colds," my mother's voice sliced through the moment. Sarah walked into the hallway, wiping her hands on a festive apron. She looked me up and down, her expression a mix of relief that I was there to play the family game and inherent disapproval. "Put your coat in the closet. Dinner is in 10 minutes. I hope you brought an appetite because Chloe actually managed to help me make the stuffing today despite her pain." "I brought something much better than an appetite, Mom," I said, standing up. I kept my grip firm on the black canvas tote bag. "Where do you want me to sit?" 10 minutes later, all 14 of us were seated around the massive, expanded dining room table. The good china was out. The crystal wine glasses sparkled under the chandelier. My father sat at the head of the table, carving the turkey with a proud, booming smile. I was seated near the middle, directly across from Chloe. The black tote bag was resting against my left leg, hidden beneath the long, cascading linen tablecloth. The meal began with the usual chaotic clinking of silverware and passing of heavy ceramic dishes. The extended family caught up on the year's events. Uncle Mark bragged about his golf handicap. Cousin David talked about his new promotion. But in my family, all roads eventually led back to the golden child. So Chloe, Aunt Carol said, leaning forward and raising her wine glass, Sarah tells us you've had an incredibly difficult year. Your health hasn't improved? Chloe lowered her eyes, executing a perfect mournful sigh. It's been a battle, Aunt Carol. The chronic fatigue syndrome has flared up terribly, and the migraines. Some days I can't even stand up without the room spinning. It's so hard, but I have to keep fighting for Liam and Sophie. A collective murmur of deep sympathy rippled across the table. She is a warrior, my father announced from the head of the table, his voice thick with emotion. He pointed the carving knife toward her. Most women would have broken under the pressure. Left with nothing by her ex-husband, dealing with a crippling neurological condition, raising 2 beautiful kids on her own. But she never complains. She just keeps fighting. We are just so incredibly proud of her, my mother added, reaching out to pat Chloe's hand. I watched Chloe soak it in, the adulation, the pity. She was feeding on it like a vampire. She looked up and caught my eye across the table. She offered me a small, brave smile, silently acknowledging my role as the silent, invisible benefactor who made her bravery possible. I didn't smile back. I just stared at her, my face completely blank. Her smile faltered slightly, but she quickly turned her attention back to Aunt Carol. In fact, my father continued, setting the knife down and reaching into his suit jacket pocket, your mother and I wanted to do something special for you tonight, Chloe. We know the holidays are tight. We know the medical foundation grants don't cover everything. He pulled out a thick, white envelope and passed it down the table. Chloe took it, her eyes widening in perfectly feigned surprise. Dad, Mom, you didn't have to do this. You've already done so much for me. Open it, sweetheart, my mother urged, beaming. Chloe opened the flap. Inside was a stack of crisp $100 bills. I knew with sickening certainty that my parents had likely drained the very last of their emergency savings to put that cash together. It's $5,000, my father said proudly, to help with the kids' tuition or to buy yourself something nice. You deserve a break, Chloe. Tears, actual, genuine-looking tears, welled up in Chloe's eyes. I don't know what to say. This will help so much. I've been so worried about how I was going to pay the heating bill this month. Thank you. Thank you. The table erupted into awes and applause. It was a sickening display of engineered martyrdom. And then, as predictably as the sunrise, my mother turned the spotlight. The warm, loving glow in Sarah's eyes vanished as she looked down the table at me. The ambient chatter slowly died down as the family sensed the shift in the atmosphere. It's a shame, my mother said, her voice cutting through the quiet like a serrated blade, that some people at this table have to rely on their retired parents for help, while others sit on a mountain of money and do absolutely nothing. The silence in the room became absolute. Uncle Mark cleared his throat uncomfortably. Liam and Sophie looked down at their plates. Sarah, my father warned gently, though he didn't actually try to stop her. No, Daniel, it needs to be said, my mother pressed on, her anger gaining momentum. It is Christmas Eve, the night of family, and I am looking at my eldest daughter, who makes a fortune as a head nurse, who doesn't have a husband or children to support, and who couldn't even bother to bring her struggling sister a gift tonight. She glared at me, her face flushed with righteous indignation. Where is your empathy, Emily? Your sister's son was in the ICU just weeks ago, and you barely even checked on him. Your sister was bedridden, and you didn't pick up the phone. Do you have any idea how cold you have become? Do you have a heart left in your chest at all, or has that hospital frozen it completely? The words echoed off the dining room walls. Aunt Carol looked horrified but fascinated. Chloe was looking down at her lap, her hands clasped tightly over the envelope of cash, playing the victim who didn't want to cause a scene. For 5 years, this was the moment I would have lowered my head. This was the moment I would have swallowed the bile, taken the abuse, and silently reminded myself that Liam and Sophie needed my money. But not tonight. I placed my linen napkin carefully on the table beside my plate. I pushed my chair back. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. I reached down into the black canvas tote bag. My fingers wrapped around the freezing hard edge of the aluminum medical clipboard. I stood up. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I walked the 3 steps from my chair to the center of the table, right between my mother and Chloe. I raised the clipboard high in the air, and then I brought it down onto the thick, protective glass covering the dining table. Crack! The sound was explosive. It sounded like a gunshot in the hushed dining room. Crystal wine glasses rattled. Several people jumped in their seats. Sophie let out a small squeak of surprise. My mother gasped, recoiling in her chair. "Emily! Have you lost your mind? What is wrong with you?" I kept my hand pressed flat against the metal clipboard. I looked directly at my mother, then panned my gaze to my father, and finally let it rest on Chloe. Chloe's face had gone the color of ash. She stared at the metal clipboard, recognizing the hospital-grade equipment, a primal sense of terror finally bleeding through her perfect mask. "You want to talk about my heart, Mom?" I asked. My voice wasn't loud, but it possessed a terrifying, deadly calm. The kind of calm I used when telling a family their loved one had died on the operating table. "You want to talk about my empathy? Let's talk about it. Let's look at the numbers." I unlatched the heavy metal clip. It snapped open with a sharp, violent clack. I pulled out the first document, the final notarized bank statement from the dissolved LLC, and slid it across the glass until it rested directly in front of my father's plate. $350,000, I stated, the number hanging in the air like a physical weight. My father looked down at the paper, confused. What is this, Emily?" "That is the exact, to the penny, amount of money I have secretly transferred to your youngest daughter over the past 5 years, I said, my voice echoing in the dead, silent room. "Every month, through a blind LLC I set up called the Local Medical Support Fund. That foundation she cries about, that miracle grant that saves her from eviction every month, it doesn't exist. It was me." A collective gasp swept around the table. Aunt Carol covered her mouth with her hand. My mother stared at me, her eyes wide, uncomprehending. You're lying. Chloe wouldn't take your money. She said she was getting government assistance and nonprofit grants." "She was getting my life," I corrected, my voice hardening into steel. I looked at Chloe. She was shaking now, her breathing shallow and rapid. "She didn't want you to know because she was too proud. So I worked 1,500 night shifts. I gave up my holidays, my sleep, my entire 20s and 30s to make sure she didn't lose her house." "Oh my God," Uncle Mark whispered, looking at Chloe, whose silence was a damning confession in itself. "But that's not the tragedy, Mom," I continued, pulling the next piece of paper from the clipboard. I held up the high-resolution photograph of Chloe and Tyler Vance on the beach in Cabo. "The tragedy is where the money went." I tossed the photo onto the center of the table. It landed perfectly between the turkey and the cranberry sauce. "Take a good look, everyone," I commanded. "This was taken 3 months ago in Cabo San Lucas. That man holding her is Tyler Vance. He is a 34-year-old unemployed gigolo. Chloe has been using my money, the money I worked 80-hour weeks in the ER to provide, to lease him a Range Rover, pay for his luxury downtown apartment, and take him on tropical vacations." No, that's a mistake. That's Photoshop," my mother stammered, picking up the photo with trembling hands. "Chloe, tell her this is a lie. Tell them you were sick in bed." Chloe opened her mouth, but only a pathetic, breathless squeak came out. She looked like a fish suffocating on a dock. The evidence was absolute. It was undeniable. "She wasn't sick, Mom," I sneered, the disgust finally breaking through my calm facade. I pulled out the stack of grocery and school receipts and threw them onto the table. They scattered like falling leaves. "She isn't paying for private school. She pulled Liam and Sophie out 3 years ago. She has been submitting fake, forged invoices to my LLC to steal the cash. While she is dining on Wagyu beef downtown with Tyler, she has been feeding those kids frozen nuggets and having unvetted teenagers watch them for days at a time." "Emily, stop!" my father shouted, suddenly standing up. His face was a dark, dangerous red. The illusion of his perfect family was shattering, and his instinct was to kill the messenger. "This is insane! You are jealous! You hired some sleazy private investigator to stalk your own sister and fabricate this garbage to ruin Christmas." "Fabricate?" I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. I looked at my father, the man who had always viewed me as a disappointment. "You want to talk about fabrications, Dad?" I pulled the state disability form from the clipboard, the one with my forged signature. I didn't toss this one. I walked over and placed it directly into his hands. "Read the signature at the bottom of that medical evaluation," I ordered. My father put on his reading glasses with shaking hands. He looked down at the paper. His eyes tracked across the lines and then stopped at the bottom. The color drained from his face entirely, leaving him a sickening, translucent gray. It's your name," he whispered. your nursing license number." "Bingo," I said softly. I turned so the entire table could hear me. To keep up the charade, Chloe needed official medical documentation to prove she was disabled so she could collect state welfare on top of the money she was stealing from me. So she stole my national provider identifier. She forged my signature. For 3 years, she has been committing federal wire fraud, disability fraud, and identity theft. If the state had audited those papers, I would have lost my nursing license and gone to federal prison for a decade. A scream tore through the dining room. It was my mother. She dropped the photo of Cabo San Lucas, clutching her chest, staring at Chloe with absolute, unadulterated horror. "You forged her name?" Sarah shrieked, her voice cracking. "You risked your sister's freedom, her career? You lied to us? All these years? The migraines, the pain?" Chloe finally snapped out of her paralysis. The panic overtook her. She stood up, her chair crashing backward to the floor. "Mom, Dad, listen to me. She's twisting it. I was desperate. Tyler manipulated me. He forced me to pay for things. I didn't have a choice." "Liar," Aunt Carol spat from across the table, her face contorted in disgust. "You make me sick. Look at your children." Liam was crying silently, holding on to his sister. Sophie was staring at her mother with wide, terrified eyes. My father was still staring at the forged document, swaying slightly on his feet. The betrayal was absolute. The golden child was a phantom. But the execution wasn't over. I still had 1 bullet left in the chamber, and it was aimed directly at the foundation of the house we were standing in. "Dad," I said, my voice cutting through Chloe's hysterical sobbing and my mother's wailing. "You're a smart man. You're a retired engineer, so explain the math to me." He looked up at me, his eyes bloodshot and lost. "What?" I walked back to the clipboard and pulled out the final document, the property deed with the municipal stamps. "If Chloe has been receiving roughly $6,000 a month from me for the last 5 years, I said, pacing slowly behind the chairs of my horrified relatives, "why did she need you to take out a secret $50,000 second mortgage on this house 8 months ago?" The room, which had been chaotic a second before, plunged back into a terrifying vacuum-like silence. My mother's head snapped toward my father so fast I thought her neck might break. "Daniel, what did she just say?" My father looked like he had been shot in the stomach. He staggered backward, gripping the edge of the table to keep from falling. "Emily, how did you—" "Please, don't what, Dad?" I challenged, my voice rising in volume, the years of repressed anger finally surging to the surface. "Don't tell your wife that you betrayed her. Don't tell her that you went to a predatory online lender, forged her consent, and took out a massive loan against the equity of this house to give to Chloe for a business opportunity that never existed." "Daniel!" Sarah screamed, lunging out of her chair toward him. She grabbed the lapels of his suit jacket, shaking him. "Tell me she's lying. Tell me you didn't mortgage our home." My father couldn't look at her. Tears spilled over his wrinkled cheeks. "She said she was going to pay it back. She said she just needed seed money for a wellness brand. Sarah, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I threw the foreclosure warning letter onto the glass table. It slid until it hit the gravy boat. "She didn't pay it back, Mom," I said, delivering the fatal blow. "She blew it in Paris with Tyler. And because Dad is on a fixed pension, he has missed the last 2 payments. The bank issued a pre-foreclosure warning last week. If he misses the January payment, the bank is going to take this house." Sarah collapsed. Her knees gave out and she fell to the hardwood floor, sobbing hysterically, burying her face in her hands. The pristine, perfect suburban Christmas was annihilated. Uncle Mark rushed over to help Sarah. Aunt Carol was openly weeping, looking at my father with profound disgust. Chloe was backed against the wall near the fireplace, clutching the envelope with the $5,000 to her chest like a shield, looking frantically at the exits. I stood in the center of the wreckage I had created. The aluminum clipboard was empty in my hands. The air in the room was heavy, toxic, and utterly ruined. "You called me heartless," I said quietly, looking down at my mother sobbing on the floor and my father standing frozen in shame. "You said I had no empathy. But I bought this family 5 years of peace with my own blood. And you rewarded me by hating me while worshiping the parasite that was bleeding you dry." I dropped the metal clipboard onto the table. It landed on top of the pile of evidence, a heavy, final punctuation mark. "I'm done," I whispered. I turned my back on the screaming, the crying, and the shattered illusions, and I walked toward the front door. But as I reached for my coat, I heard the sharp, frantic clicking of heels on the hardwood behind me. "Emily, wait!" Chloe screamed, her voice shrill with a new, terrifying realization. I stopped, my hand on the brass doorknob, and slowly turned around. The stage was set for the final act, and Chloe had no idea that the trap hadn't just sprung. It had locked her inside forever. Chloe stood at the edge of the hallway, her chest heaving, the $5,000 envelope of cash still gripped so tightly in her manicured hands that the paper was crumpling. The mask of the fragile, suffering victim was completely gone, replaced by the cornered, feral desperation of a con artist whose marks had just woken up. "You think you've won?" Chloe hissed, her voice trembling with a toxic cocktail of fear and venom. She glanced back at the dining room where our parents were still sobbing amidst the ruins of their financial lives, then locked her eyes back on me. "You think you can just drop a bomb on Christmas Eve and walk away, Emily? You can't cut me off. You wouldn't dare." I didn't step toward her. I didn't need to. I held all the cards. "The LLC is already dissolved, Chloe. The bank accounts are frozen. The money is gone." "Then I'll take the kids and leave," Chloe shrieked, playing the ultimate, unforgivable trump card she had relied on for 5 years. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "If you don't pay my rent, if you don't pay for my lawyers when the state board comes after me, Liam and Sophie will be sleeping in a homeless shelter. I will drag them into the gutter with me, Emily. Is that what you want? You love them so much, right? You want your precious nephew and niece to starve because you were too vindictive to keep writing the checks?" It was the threat Jessica had predicted. The human shield. Behind Chloe, in the living room, Liam and Sophie were huddled together on the rug, clutching each other, terrified by the screaming. I looked at Chloe, feeling a profound, absolute disgust. "You really are a monster. You would weaponize your own children to save yourself." "I am their mother!" Chloe screamed, her voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "They are mine, and you are going to fix this, Emily. You are going to pay off Dad's second mortgage, and you are going to hire me a defense attorney, or I swear to God I will pack them in the car right now and you will never see them again." I reached into my black canvas tote bag one last time. "You aren't taking them anywhere, Chloe," I said. I pulled out a thick, heavy document bound in a blue legal backing. It was the only paper I hadn't put on the aluminum clipboard. It was the paper that had required Jessica's brilliance, the private investigator's undeniable proof, and a closed-door session with a family court judge. I walked up to Chloe and pressed the document flat against her chest. Instinctively, she took it. "Read the first page," I ordered. Chloe looked down. Her eyes darted across the bold, black legal font at the top of the page. "Ex parte emergency order of conservatorship and custody, State of Illinois." "What? What is this?" she stammered, the color draining from her face for the second time that night. "That is a judge's order signed yesterday morning," I said, my voice ringing with absolute unyielding authority. "Based on overwhelming evidence of gross negligence, child endangerment, and impending federal felony indictments, the state has stripped you of all physical and legal custody of Liam and Sophie." Chloe gasped, dropping the envelope of cash to the floor to grip the legal document with both hands. No, you can't do this. A judge wouldn't do this without a hearing." An emergency family court judge will do exactly that when presented with evidence that a mother left a child with a severe, life-threatening allergy in the care of an unvetted teenager to go on a luxury vacation funded by stolen money, I replied coldly. "You have no rights to them anymore, Chloe. I am their legal guardian. If you try to put them in your car tonight, it is legally considered kidnapping, and I will have the police arrest you before you hit the interstate." Chloe staggered backward, hitting the wall. The breath left her lungs in a ragged, panicked wheeze. You stole my children." "I saved them from a parasite," I corrected her. "I'll fight you!" Chloe screamed, sobbing wildly now, thrashing against the inescapable reality of the trap. "I'll sell the house. The market is up. I'll sell my house on Indianola Avenue. I'll liquidate the equity, and I will hire a team of ruthless lawyers to destroy you in court." I looked at her, tilting my head slightly. This was it. The final twist of the knife. Twist number 5. "Sell the house?" I asked softly, a terrifyingly calm smile touching my lips. "Chloe, did you ever actually read the lease agreement you signed 5 years ago?" She froze, her tears suspending in her eyes. "What?" "When you came to me crying that your ex-husband left you homeless, you said you couldn't get approved for a mortgage because your credit was ruined," I explained, stepping closer so she could hear every single syllable. "So the local medical support fund stepped in. The LLC bought the house in cash, and you signed a tenancy agreement to live there while the grant covered your monthly rent." I leaned in, my voice dropping to a whisper that only she could hear. You don't own that house, Chloe. My LLC does. And yesterday afternoon, as the sole proprietor, I legally dissolved the LLC and transferred the deed of that property into a locked, irrevocable trust fund established solely for Liam and Sophie. You don't have any equity. You don't have an asset to sell. In fact, as the executor of that trust, I am officially terminating your month-to-month lease. You have 30 days to vacate the premises before I send the sheriff to forcibly evict you. Chloe's knees buckled. She slid down the wall, collapsing onto the hardwood floor in a heap of expensive cashmere and shattered delusions. She had nothing. No children, no house, no money. And a looming federal indictment for identity theft that carried a mandatory prison sentence. The slaughterhouse doors had closed, and she was locked inside. Emily, please. I turned around. My father and mother were standing at the edge of the hallway. They looked like they had aged 20 years in the span of 30 minutes. My mother's face was streaked with black mascara, her eyes swollen. My father was shaking, leaning heavily on my mother's shoulder. They stepped past Chloe, ignoring her completely on the floor, and walked toward me. Emily, my father choked out, his voice cracking with the humiliating weight of his own foolishness. The trust, the money you saved. You said you put all the LLC assets into it. You have to have hundreds of thousands of dollars in there. It belongs to Liam and Sophie now, Dad, I said. It is legally locked for their education, their healthcare, and their future. I can't touch it for personal use, and I wouldn't, even if I could. My mother reached out, grabbing my forearm with desperate, clawing fingers. Emily, please. The bank is going to take this house. We are retired. We have nowhere to go. If Daniel defaults on this second mortgage, we will be on the street. You have to help us. You make a good salary at the hospital. You can take out a loan. You can pay the arrears. I looked down at my mother's hand, gripping my arm. The same hand that had patted Chloe's shoulder an hour ago while calling me a cold-hearted, empathy-lacking disappointment. I gently but firmly pried her fingers off my arm. No, Mom, I said. My mother recoiled as if I had struck her. Emily, we are your parents. You would let us lose our home? You chose your home, Mom, I said, my voice devoid of anger, leaving only a hollow, echoing sadness. You and Dad chose to take the equity of your sanctuary and hand it to a liar because you loved the story of the brave, struggling victim more than you loved the daughter who was actually bleeding to keep you all afloat. You watched me work myself to the bone. You insulted me at every family gathering. You told me I had a heart of ice. I looked at my father, who was weeping silently. I am not cold, Mom. I am just a mirror, I told them. I am finally reflecting your own choices back at you. I bought you 5 years of peace. Now you have to pay the tab. I turned away from them and walked into the living room. Liam and Sophie were sitting on the rug, looking up at me with wide, frightened eyes. I knelt down in front of them, my heart softening instantly. I didn't see the wreckage of the Johnson family anymore. I only saw 2 innocent lives that finally had a chance to breathe. Liam, Sophie, I said gently, holding out my hands. Go get your coats and your shoes. You're going to come stay with Auntie Em for a while, okay? We're going to go on a trip, just the 3 of us. Liam didn't hesitate. He grabbed his little sister's hand and they ran to the closet. They didn't look back at their mother sobbing on the floor. Children know who actually loves them. They know who shows up when they can't breathe. I helped them zip up their coats and pulled their wool hats over their ears. I picked up my black canvas tote bag, took Sophie's small hand in my left and Liam's in my right. As I walked out the front door, leaving the suffocating heat, the crying, and the shattered crystal behind me, the cold Chicago air hit my face. It was freezing, sharp, and brilliantly crisp. The snow was still falling, covering the driveway in a fresh, unblemished layer of white. I buckled the kids into the back seat of my car, turned on the heat, and got behind the wheel. I didn't look back at the picturesque colonial house. I put the car in drive, the tires crunching satisfyingly over the fresh snow, and pulled out into the night. The next morning was Christmas. I didn't wake up to the smell of a tense family breakfast or the sound of my mother's passive-aggressive complaints. I woke up to the sound of Liam and Sophie giggling in the living room of Jessica's sprawling, cozy cabin in Aspen, Colorado. We had taken a red-eye flight out of O'Hare at 3 a.m., leaving the state of Illinois and the toxic wasteland of my family thousands of miles behind us. I walked out of the guest bedroom holding a cup of hot, fresh coffee. Jessica was already awake, sitting by a massive stone fireplace, watching Liam and Sophie tear into a pile of presents we had hastily bought at a boutique in the ski village. They seem happy, Jessica noted, taking a sip of her tea. "They're safe," I replied, sitting down next to her. I looked out the massive A-frame windows at the snow-capped Rocky Mountains. The sun was rising, painting the peaks in brilliant shades of gold and pink. I took a deep breath. My chest didn't ache. My shoulders weren't heavy. For the first time in 5 years, the metronome of anxiety in my head was completely silent. The trap had worked. The surgery was a success. The rot was gone. I watched Sophie hold up a new stuffed bear, her smile radiant and unburdened. I smiled back, taking a sip of my coffee. It was the best Christmas I had ever had. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you made it this far, you are incredible, and I truly appreciate you letting me share this with you. Dealing with toxic family members is one of the hardest things in the world, but walking away to protect your peace and the innocent ones who rely on you is always worth it. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, leave a comment with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories just like this one. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next video.